The Duke of Digestive Juices, my prized Nepenthes Raja, was looking particularly parched this afternoon, its magnificent pitcher swaying slightly as if begging for another spritz of distilled water. "Patience, Your Majesty," I murmured, reaching for my trusty misting bottle, a vintage apothecary vessel I'd picked up at a flea market and repurposed for just this noble task. 1, 2, 3, perfect bursts of ultrafine moisture landed on its waxy surface. Bliss. The Duke, you see, is a delicate soul, prone to dramatic wilting if his humidity levels so much as hiccup. And then the world went silent. Not just my little corner of it. The rhythmic hum of the 3 industrial-grade humidifiers I'd jury-rigged in the spare bedroom, now lovingly referred to as the nursery, vanished. The cheerful buzz of the full-spectrum LED grow lights, carefully calibrated to mimic the tropical sun these botanical divas craved, winked out. Even the gentle gurgle of the experimental hydroponics system I was testing for my Sarracenia collection ceased its soothing song. Total, utter, plant-life-threatening silence. "Oh, for the love of what now?" I muttered, my blood pressure already beginning its familiar climb. A power outage. Just what my ridiculously high-maintenance collection of leafy prima donnas, who would probably faint if I played Nickelback within a 10-mile radius, needed. My phone screen flickered to life, displaying a full set of bars. Weird. I opened the neighborhood's notoriously dramatic Facebook group. Predictably, a chorus of digital crickets. No anyone else's power out posts, no panicked emojis, just Mrs. Henderson complaining about a stray cat in her petunias. A cold, sickening dread coiled in my gut. I knew with the certainty that the sun would rise, probably after Brenda approved its color, exactly who was behind this. I practically sprinted to the window overlooking the front yard, nearly tripping over a rogue bag of perlite. And there she was, Brenda, standing by the external utility panel on the side of my house, her silhouette radiating an almost palpable aura of smug satisfaction. She held a clipboard, her weapon of choice in the ongoing suburban Cold War, and as if sensing my gaze, she turned, made direct eye contact, and offered a sickly sweet, completely insincere little wave. My teeth ground together. This wasn't an accident. This was... Brenda, let me be clear. These aren't just a few sad-looking succulents I picked up at the grocery store. This is a meticulously curated collection of rare and temperamental carnivorous plants, an investment of thousands of dollars and years of painstaking cultivation. The Heliamphora minor, the sun pitcher I'd painstakingly propagated from a single, near-death specimen, requires precise temperature fluctuations to mimic its native Venezuelan tepuis. The Cephalotus follicularis, those adorable little Albany pitcher plants, are notoriously susceptible to root rot if their humidity isn't perfect. And then there's the ghost of Borneo, a Phalaenopsis bellina orchid so rare and ethereal it looks like it's spun from moonlight. It demands a constant 87% humidity. Anything less, and its delicate, luminous petals will literally turn to dust. Dust, Brenda! You're turning floral ghosts into actual dust. Rage, hot and sharp, propelled me towards the front door. As I marched through the living room, my internal monologue kicked into overdrive. A rapid-fire, hilarious, and only slightly unhinged history of my ongoing battle with the self-proclaimed Queen of Conformity, Brenda, President for life, or until someone could figure out how to trigger a recall election without her rigging the ballot box with beige-colored voter slips, of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. It all started, as most suburban dramas do, with something utterly, mind-numbingly trivial: the mailbox. Mine, a sturdy, slightly oversized, dark green model I'd chosen for its superior mail-holding capacity, I subscribe to a frankly embarrassing number of plant catalogs, apparently offended Brenda's deeply held aesthetic sensibilities. One sunny Saturday, as I was happily unpacking a delivery of exotic moss, she'd approached me, laser level in hand, her face a mask of grave concern. "Alexander," she'd announced, her voice dripping with the gravitas usually reserved for announcing national emergencies. "I've conducted a survey. Your mailbox, it's exceeding the approved height by a full quarter of an inch. Bylaw 17C clearly stipulates." She'd droned on for what felt like an eternity, citing regulations about harmonious roadside presentation and the preservation of neighborhood character. I'd stared at her, dumbfounded. A quarter of an inch? Was this really the hill she wanted to die on? Apparently, yes. After a series of increasingly passive-aggressive emails filled with bolded citations and underlined pronouncements, I'd begrudgingly shimmed the post, feeling like I'd just lost a battle to the forces of beige tyranny. Then came the Great Wind Chime War. I enjoy a bit of gentle tinkling in the breeze. I'd hung a set of handcrafted bamboo chimes on my porch, their mellow tones a soothing counterpoint to the incessant lawnmower symphony of suburbia. Brenda, however, deemed them dissonant and a disruption to the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. The notes started appearing on my doorstep. Polite at first, a friendly reminder, then increasingly strident. Immediate cessation of noise pollution demanded. My response? I learned to play the opening riff of Stairway to Heaven on them, repeatedly, at dawn. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up like a Christmas tree, mostly with people begging me to stop, but a few brave souls offered emojis of solidarity. Brenda, predictably, threatened to call the police for noise ordinance violations. Officer Davis, the veteran who'd clearly drawn the short straw that day, had arrived, listened to my rendition of Page and Plant with a weary sigh, and suggested, with a twinkle in his eye, that perhaps we could all try to be a little more harmonious. The chimes remained, but the greenhouse proposal, that was the main event, my magnum opus, my sanctuary. For months I'd pored over designs, researching ventilation systems, humidity controls, and the optimal light spectrum for my demanding flora. I'd consulted with horticultural experts, even sketching out plans on napkins during particularly inspiring moments at the local diner. The result was a beautiful, modern greenhouse designed to seamlessly blend with my backyard while providing the perfect environment for my collection. I'd submitted meticulously detailed blueprints to the city, navigated the labyrinthine permit process, and, after weeks of bureaucratic hurdles, finally received every single approval. Victory, or so I thought. As a courtesy, a gesture of goodwill to the neighbors, really, I then submitted the same city-approved plans to the HOA Architectural Review Committee, which, as I'd learned through bitter experience, was essentially Brenda and two elderly residents, Agnes and Mildred, who looked perpetually terrified and seemed to rubber stamp anything Brenda put in front of them, probably for fear of Brenda citing them for improperly pruned rose bushes. The rejection letter arrived a week later, typed in a disturbingly formal font and brimming with thinly veiled disdain. The greenhouse, it declared, was a commercial-grade eyesore, inconsistent with the neighborhood's traditional aesthetic. Traditional aesthetic? Half the houses on the street were vinyl-sided ranches built in the 70s. The letter helpfully suggested I consider a tasteful rock garden instead. A rock garden? My nepenthes would weep. My Drosera would stage a photosynthetic protest. Now, standing at my front door, practically vibrating with fury, I saw Brenda waiting for me, arms crossed, her expression a masterpiece of self-righteous indignation. "Alexander," she announced, her voice tight with what she clearly thought was righteous authority. I've issued a cease and desist order on your property. There's been a report of unauthorized construction activity." "The footings for the city-approved greenhouse?" I interrupted, my voice dangerously low. And for safety reasons," she continued, steamrolling over my feeble attempt at logic, "I've had to disable the power flow to the residence pending an HOA-sanctioned electrical inspection." "A report from who, Brenda? Your network of neighborhood squirrels. You can't just cut my power. That's highly illegal." "It's in the bylaws," she insisted, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "Section 42, paragraph 6. The association reserves the right to take necessary action to prevent unapproved modifications that may impact community safety." "Your little glass box is a clear violation." I stared at her, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the greenhouse anymore. This was about power, about control, about a woman who clearly derived an unhealthy amount of pleasure from making her neighbors' lives miserable. And then, I looked at my watch. The digital display blinked. 2:57 p.m. A slow, wicked grin. One I hadn't worn since that time in college when I'd replaced my roommate's contact lens solution with pickle juice spread across my face. Brenda blinked, a flicker of confusion replacing her self-satisfaction. "Brenda," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket, "you have absolutely no idea what you've just done." My fingers danced across the screen, dialing a familiar number. "Because, you see, while you were busy playing neighborhood power broker, I was actually, following the rules." The line connected. "Mr. Henderson? Alex Thompson here?" "Yes, about the preliminary site inspection for the greenhouse footings. Perfect timing. You're right on schedule." Brenda's eyes widened. The clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp. "You see, Brenda," I continued, my voice dripping with false pleasantness as Mr. Henderson's slightly weary voice confirmed his imminent arrival. "I wasn't just going to start digging without the proper city oversight. Unlike some people, I believe in adhering to regulations. And it just so happens that Mr. Henderson from the city planning department is due at my property. Oh, any minute now." A dark blue Ford Ranger with the City of Willow Creek logo emblazoned on the side pulled up to the curb. A man in a slightly rumpled polo shirt and khaki pants emerged, a thick clipboard tucked under his arm. Mr. Henderson. A man whose face seemed permanently etched with the quiet resignation of someone who'd spent far too many years mediating disputes about fence heights and tree trimming. "Mr. Henderson!" I called out, injecting an almost theatrical level of cheerfulness into my voice. "Perfect timing, welcome. We have a lot to go over." Brenda stood frozen, her mouth agape like a landed fish. "Who is this? You can't just have city officials here without HOA approval," she finally sputtered, her voice a strangled squawk. I turned to Mr. Henderson, completely ignoring Brenda's increasingly frantic protests. "Sir, before we even look at the greenhouse footings, I need to report an immediate and severe safety violation. An unauthorized, untrained civilian has been tampering with my home's main electrical breaker. I'm extremely concerned about the fire hazard she's created, not to mention the potential damage to my sensitive equipment inside." I gestured dramatically towards Brenda. This woman, who has no electrical training whatsoever, unilaterally decided to cut the power to my residence. Mr. Henderson's perpetually weary eyes, the kind that had likely seen it all from zoning disputes to sidewalk encroachment sagas, suddenly sharpened with a flicker of something that might have been professional interest. Tampering with residential electrical systems? That was a far cry from an oversized mailbox. That was a genuine safety issue. Without a word, Mr. Henderson turned his attention to Brenda, his demeanor shifting from mildly inconvenienced bureaucrat to serious official on the clock. "Ma'am," he stated, his voice surprisingly firm, the weariness replaced by an almost robotic adherence to procedure. "Did you shut off the power to this residence?" Brenda, visibly flustered by this unexpected turn of events, stammered, I am the HOA president. I was enforcing the community covenant. There was unauthorized construction. That's not what I asked, ma'am, Henderson repeated, his tone flat and unwavering. Did you physically manipulate the circuit breakers in that electrical panel? He gestured towards the utility box with his pen. Brenda's face flushed a mottled red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I believed it was necessary for the safety of the community. Henderson simply nodded slowly, the movement radiating an air of profound disbelief. Right. He then turned and began walking towards Brenda's own meticulously manicured property. Let's have a look at your property address, ma'am. I followed, trying to suppress a triumphant grin. This was better than I could have ever hoped for. Brenda, completely off balance, trailed behind us, her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling with every step. Oh, watch your step there, Mr. Henderson, I interjected, my voice oozing with concern. Brenda's front walkway has some rather enthusiastic paver placement, quite uneven. I'd hate for a city official to trip and injure themselves on potentially non-compliant hardscaping. Probably not entirely up to the 2018 Municipal Code for Pedestrian Pathways, is it? Henderson paused, his gaze drifting downwards. He took a slow, deliberate step, then another. He pulled out his notepad and made a concise entry. Brenda shot me a look that could have withered a cactus. I offered her my most innocent smile. And goodness, I continued, my helpful citizen persona fully engaged. That's a lovely new deck Brenda had built last summer. So expansive. I don't recall seeing a building permit posted for it at the time, but I'm sure she filed one. Brenda is such a stickler for the rules, you know? Always reminding us about proper waste disposal and the precise shade of beige our outdoor furniture cushions must be. Henderson's pen began to move more rapidly across the page. He walked over to Brenda's sprawling, multi-level deck, his eyes scanning the support beams and joist hangers. He even knelt down, peering underneath as if searching for structural goblins. Her fence seems a bit substantial, too, doesn't it? I mused, tilting my head and squinting as if deep in architectural contemplation. I thought city code capped solid privacy fences at 6 feet. And that one looks like it's pushing 7, maybe even 7.5 in places. But what do I know? I'm just an amateur gardener with an unfortunate mailbox. Henderson straightened up, his expression unreadable. He walked along the length of Brenda's imposing wooden fence, occasionally tapping it with his pen. More notes were taken. Brenda was now following us like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her earlier smugness completely evaporated. Just then, a massive diesel truck rumbled down the street and parked in front of my house. The side of the truck read, "Gus's concrete and construction were solid." The driver's side door swung open, and Gus emerged, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and whose voice could carry across 3 counties. His crew, a motley assortment of equally burly individuals, piled out after him, shouldering shovels and various other construction paraphernalia. Gus took one look at the tableau before him. Me beaming, Brenda looking like she was about to spontaneously combust, and a city inspector meticulously examining her fence, and let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Alex, my boy," Gus boomed, his voice echoing down the otherwise quiet street. "Looks like you're having a bit of a gathering. Did I miss the memo? Is this the neighborhood potluck?" "Just a small civic engagement, Gus," I replied, trying to keep a straight face. "We're having a rather spirited discussion about municipal code compliance." Brenda, her composure finally shattering, did the only thing a cornered Karen knows how to do. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a harassment incident," she shrieked into the receiver. "My neighbor, Alexander Thompson, is is intimidating me. He's brought intimidating men to my property. I feel threatened." A few minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Miller, a young, fresh-faced rookie who looked like he still believed in the inherent goodness of humanity, stepped out, followed by Officer Davis, the veteran I'd encountered during the Great Wind Chime War. Davis surveyed the scene with a familiar, world-weary expression. Miller, all crisp uniform and by-the-book seriousness, approached Brenda first, notepad in hand. She launched into a frantic, garbled account of my alleged harassment, emphasizing Gus's impressive biceps and Mr. Henderson's threatening clipboard. Davis, meanwhile, sauntered over to me, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Déjà vu all over again, Thompson?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. I gave him a wry smile. "You have no idea, officer. This time, however, I think the noise complaint is coming from a different source." I gestured towards Brenda, who was now waving her arms emphatically as she recounted her version of events to the rookie. Davis listened patiently as Officer Miller took down Brenda's statement, occasionally interjecting a calm question. Then, he approached me. I explained the situation concisely. Brenda had illegally cut my power, jeopardizing my property. Coincidentally, the city inspector was already scheduled to examine my greenhouse footings. During that inspection, Mr. Henderson had noticed some potential code violations on Brenda's property. Finally, Davis approached Mr. Henderson, who delivered a dry, matter-of-fact summary of his findings, his tone as neutral as Switzerland. Officer Davis then turned back to Brenda, his expression a perfect blend of exasperation and amusement. "Ma'am," he began, his voice laced with an almost theatrical sigh, "let me get this straight. You admit to deliberately shutting off the electricity to your neighbor's house?" Brenda sputtered. "I had to. He was building without approval." "Regardless," Davis continued, his tone firm, "tampering with someone's electrical system is a potentially dangerous and illegal act." Then, he gestured towards her deck and fence, "a city inspector who was here on official business happened to observe some discrepancies on your property?" Brenda's face was now a mask of pure outrage. "This is harassment. They're all ganging up on me." Officer Davis sighed again, a long, suffering sound that spoke volumes about his experiences with suburban disputes. "Ma'am, Mr. Henderson is a city official conducting an inspection. Mr. Thompson has a right to have his property powered. And Mr. Gus and his crew are here for a prearranged construction project." He turned to me. "Mr. Thompson, are you intending to press charges regarding the power being cut?" I considered it for a fleeting moment. The image of Brenda being hauled off in handcuffs was undeniably appealing, but a longer, more satisfying game was afoot. "No, officer," I said with a magnanimous wave of my hand. "I think the city citations will be punishment enough." Officer Davis nodded slowly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Wise choice, ma'am," he addressed Brenda again, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I strongly suggest you refrain from taking matters into your own hands in the future. If you have concerns about your neighbor's property, contact the HOA or the city through the proper channels." He gave her a pointed look. Tampering with utilities is not the proper channel. He and Officer Miller returned to their patrol car. As they drove away, Davis gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod of what I could only interpret as respect. The police were gone. An awkward silence descended upon the street. It was just me, Brenda, Mr. Henderson, and Gus's crew, who were now leaning on their shovels, openly enjoying the spectacle like it was the final act of a particularly juicy reality TV show. Mr. Henderson, unfazed by the preceding drama, finally finished his inspection of Brenda's property. He meticulously tore several pages from his carbon copy notepad, the sound ripping through the quiet tension. He walked over to Brenda, who stood frozen on her lawn, a picture of bewildered fury. With a detached air, Henderson handed her the sheaf of papers. "Here are your notices of violation, ma'am," he said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. "You'll receive official copies with payment instructions in the mail." He turned to me. "All right, son. Let's take a look at those footings for your greenhouse." Brenda stared at the papers in her hand, as if they were written in an alien language. I could see the bold headings. Notice of violation, unauthorized tampering with residential electrical utilities. Fine, $1,000. Notice of violation, non-compliant front walkway, uneven paver placement, potential trip hazard. Required remediation, repair to meet 2018 Municipal Code standards within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in further fines. Stop work, order. Unpermitted rear deck construction. Required action, retroactive building. Permit application and structural inspection. Discrepancies must be rectified at owner's expense. Fine, $2,500. Pending successful permitting and inspection. Notice of violation. Fence height exceeds permitted limit. Required remediation. Reduce fence height to a maximum of 6 feet within 60 days. Failure to comply will result in further fines. Fine, $500. The sheer weight of the fines and the required corrective actions was staggering, but the real cost wasn't just the money, it was the public humiliation, the undeniable evidence that her reign of beige terror was crumbling. "Have a nice day, ma'am," Henderson said with a complete lack of sincerity, before turning and walking towards my backyard. Brenda remained rooted to the spot, the color draining from her face, the violation notices fluttering slightly in her trembling hands. Mr. Henderson's inspection of the greenhouse footings was everything I expected, thorough, efficient, and ultimately uneventful. My meticulous planning and adherence to the city's regulations, prompted in no small part by the fear of Brenda finding another reason to complain, meant everything was perfectly to code. The rebar was spaced precisely, the depth was exact, and the forms were level. Henderson nodded his approval, signed off on his paperwork, and handed me a copy. "You're cleared to pour the concrete, son," he said, a hint of a smile finally gracing his lips. "Looks like you actually know what you're doing." As Henderson packed up his clipboard and prepared to leave, Gus clapped me on the back with a force that nearly sent me stumbling into the freshly dug footings. "Kid," he boomed, his laughter echoing down the street. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen homeowners fight with HOAs over everything from paint colors to misplaced gnomes, but I have never, ever seen someone dismantle a neighborhood tyrant so completely, so efficiently, and all without raising their voice. That, my friend, was a goddamn masterpiece. Consider the concrete pour on the house today." I was genuinely taken aback. "Gus, I don't know what to say." "Say thank you, and let's get this concrete in the ground before Brenda tries to claim the hole isn't the right shade of dirt," Gus chuckled, gesturing to his crew who were already positioning the hoses from the concrete truck. The engine roared to life, and the thick gray sludge began to flow into the prepared forms, solidifying the foundation of my long-awaited sanctuary. While the concrete was being poured, I calmly walked over to my external breaker box. I opened it, visually inspected the wiring for any damage. Thankfully, Brenda's ham-fisted intervention hadn't caused any lasting issues, and with a satisfying click, flipped the main power switch back on. The lights in my house flickered, then steadied. The comforting hum of the humidifiers filled the air. I rushed back inside to the nursery. The full-spectrum LEDs glowed warmly, casting a nurturing light on my precious collection. My plants, bless their resilient little chlorophyll-filled hearts, looked a bit droopy from their brief power outage, but they would recover. The Duke of Digestive Juices seemed to sigh in relief. I walked to the window and looked across the street. Brenda was still standing on her porch, clutching the citation papers, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The neighborhood tyrant had been brought down, not by shouting or confrontation, but by her own weaponized rule book. I raised my travel mug, filled with lukewarm coffee, in a silent, sarcastic toast. Weeks turned into a month. The greenhouse frame, a sleek structure of aluminum and tempered glass, now stood proudly in my backyard, a beacon of horticultural hope amidst the beige landscape. The neighborhood was abuzz, the dramatic events having become local legend. Brenda's unpermitted deck sported a large, official-looking "Stop Work" sign, a scarlet letter of suburban transgression. A different, decidedly less enthusiastic contracting crew was slowly, painstakingly jackhammering her uneven front walkway. Word had it that the retroactive permitting process for her deck was proving to be a bureaucratic nightmare, involving multiple inspections and demands for structural modifications that would cost her a small fortune. Brenda's reign on the HOA board was effectively over. The two terrified retirees on the Architectural Review Committee had mysteriously resigned, replaced by a couple of younger, more pragmatic neighbors who actually seemed interested in community well-being rather than enforcing arbitrary aesthetic standards. Brenda's once feared emails now went largely ignored, relegated to the digital dustbin. For lease signs had even sprouted on the lawns of Agnes and Mildred, adding a final, almost Shakespearean layer of karmic justice to the saga. My first-person narration during this period became a masterclass in smug satisfaction, laced with the requisite amount of mock concern for Brenda's unfortunate situation. I regaled the reader with tales of neighborhood gossip, exaggerated rumors of Brenda's mounting legal bills, and the sheer joy of watching her meticulously curated yard slowly be dismantled by court order, or at least city code. I became an accidental folk hero. Neighbors I'd previously only exchanged awkward waves with now stopped to chat, offering unsolicited gardening advice and leaving anonymous gifts of overripe tomatoes and zucchini on my porch, tokens of appreciation for my stand against the Iron Lady of the HOA. Then came the delegation. It was a Tuesday evening. I was inside the greenhouse, marveling at the newly unfurled leaf of my Amorphophallus titanum, nicknamed Stinky, when a group of my neighbors approached my backyard fence. Among them were Sarah from down the street, Tom with the perpetually barking beagle, and even old Mr. Henderson, no relation to the city inspector, who rarely ventured out of his house. "Alex," Sarah called out, a hopeful note in her voice. "We need to talk." I emerged from my verdant sanctuary, wiping soil from my hands. "Evening, folks. What's the occasion? Did Brenda finally try to regulate the length of our shadows?" Tom chuckled. "No, nothing like that. We've been talking and, well, the HOA election is next month." My stomach dropped. "Please don't tell me." "We want to nominate you for president," Sarah announced, her expression earnest. "You're the only one who knows the bylaws well enough to actually read them. And you're definitely the only one who's ever stood up to Brenda and actually won. You'd be perfect." My internal monologue spiraled into a vortex of suburban dread. Perfect? I'd rather be slowly digested by one of my own pitcher plants. Being in charge of the HOA sounded like my own personal, beige-colored hell. Endless meetings about mulch, heated debates about holiday decorations, and the soul-crushing responsibility of enforcing rules about the precise shade of gray acceptable for mailbox posts. "Oh, wow, that's incredibly flattering," I stammered, trying to sound appreciative while simultaneously plotting my escape to a remote jungle where HOAs didn't exist, and the dominant aesthetic was gloriously, unapologetically green. "But honestly, I don't think I'm the right person for the job. My only real platform would be to immediately dissolve the entire association, which, while tempting, probably wouldn't be the most popular policy. A few of them chuckled, but Sarah pressed on. We need someone who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Someone who understands the rules, but isn't afraid to bend them a little in the name of, well, not being completely insane. I shook my head, my decision firm. I appreciate the vote of confidence, I really do, but my true passion lies within these 4 glass walls. My political ambitions extend no further than ensuring optimal humidity levels for my Drosera. Trust me, you're better off finding someone who actually enjoys the subtle nuances of neighborhood governance. Maybe Mr. Henderson? I gestured hopefully towards the elderly gentleman, who looked like he'd rather face a firing squad than attend an HOA meeting. After a bit more gentle persuasion, they finally accepted my refusal, albeit with a collective sigh of disappointment. I breathed a silent sigh of relief. My victory over Brenda had been sweet, but I had no desire to inherit her crown of suburban tyranny. The greenhouse was finally complete. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, illuminating a thriving ecosystem of exotic flora. The air was thick with the earthy scent of peat moss and the sweet perfume of blooming orchids. Inside, I was in my element, a benevolent dictator presiding over my leafy kingdom. Stinky had indeed produced a magnificent, if odoriferous, bloom. The ghost of Borneo was cascading with luminous white flowers. Even the notoriously finicky heliumphora seemed content. I looked through the glass and saw Brenda across the way. Her fence, now a uniform 6 feet, looked strangely diminished. She was in her yard, meticulously pruning her rose bushes, her movements stiff and devoid of their usual imperious flair. She looked smaller, defeated. I smiled, a genuine, non-sarcastic smile this time. I hadn't just built a home for my plants. I'd inadvertently carved out a small sanctuary of peace for myself, proving that sometimes the most effective way to fight a petty tyrant is not with fiery rhetoric, but with a meticulously researched rule book, a surprisingly well-timed city inspector, and a healthy dose of malicious compliance. I plucked a hapless fly out of the air with a pair of delicate tweezers and held it above the gaping maw of a particularly robust Venus flytrap I'd affectionately nicknamed Brenda's Bane. "Dinner is served," I murmured, dropping the fly into the waiting trap. The jaws snapped shut with a satisfying little crunch. Peace, at least for now, had returned to Willow Creek. And in my little glass haven, the circle of life continued, one unsuspecting insect at a time.